Welcome to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Madel, joined as always by Chris Bouguet. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Rachel. What's going on? I got some stuff to run by you if you got a minute.
Yes, let's go.
All right. So the episode today is an exciting one. You and I were asked by our friend Danielle Reed, who is teaching a course at Midwestern University, to come and speak to the students in that course, and it's sort of like a Q&A sort of thing. And we said, sure, if you will record it. And that's what this is. That's what we're going to play later on in the episode. But I have another thing about students that I want to run by you. Okay. So recently I accepted a gig as an adjunct professor for George Washington University, which is right in Washington, D.C. There's a little bit of in-person, but then the rest of it is online. And the online portion is pre-made videos, talking about accessibility and ed tech in the classroom. But the course is all for pre-service occupational therapy students, right? It's the assistive technology course for occupational therapy. I did have 4 hours dedicated specifically to AAC. So here we go, talking to pre-service students. This time, though, specifically to occupational therapy students, you have 4 hours. Go. What would you talk about?
I don't know, Chris. That's like a hard one. It's like hard to prioritize, especially thinking through the lens of OT. I think that I would be thinking through the lens of how can I empower OTs to feel confident in collaborating with SLPs on AAC? Because I think that's an area where many OTs are unsure. And I think that collaboration can be so key, because I think occupational therapists have such an amazing breadth of knowledge around motor, specifically, and especially for our kids with complex bodies. Having that expertise and the integration of that with AAC feels really important to me. So my first thing that I think about is motor planning and the motor aspects of AAC. You're shaking your head. Is that...
So of course, you and I are spot on with our thought process. For the 4 hours on AAC, that was sort of an undercurrent of interdisciplinary work, and choice making and the OT's part in the selection process. But there's a whole other section that's going to be coming up on interdisciplinary practice. So I didn't hit that very hard in the AAC section. Like I said, I'm a big fan of the word foreshadowing. How many times have I said it on this podcast? Foreshadowing, we're going to be talking about to Midwestern University. So that's what I said is through the selection process, you're part of a team. If anyone's sort of doing it on their own, that should be like a red flag or caution for you. You'd be hoping to be, your best friend is going to be the speech language pathologist, and your second best friend is going to be the physical therapist, and you will be part of a larger team with the teacher and the parents and administrators and anyone else helping make selections, that part. And then later on, like you were saying, with the implementation piece, where can we work together and brainstorm? And then I did hit harder and a little bit longer motor planning. But that wasn't all. I'm just curious, what else would you talk about besides interdisciplinary practice and motor planning?
I think the big one that comes up no matter who you're talking to about AAC is the mindset piece, because I feel like that is the piece that can really make or break a team. Like if you have a whole team that believes in a student's potential for communication using AAC, like that team's going to be successful. And conversely, if you have a team, even with like one or two people that don't believe that to be true, that have limiting beliefs when it comes to our students' potential, then that could break it. So I feel like the mindset piece feels really important.
That was the first hour of the 4 hours. It's exactly what I spent getting everyone on the same page, thinking about what exactly your mindset should be going into it, so that we're not limiting anybody. So yes, exactly. That's exactly, you are checking off all the boxes of what I put in the presentation. And of course, it's not really a presentation so much as an interactive experience. But that was a big part of it.
Okay, I thought of something else.
Okay.
Core words, core language feels like really important. And again, I do a lot of work overlapping with OTs, and I feel like that's something that I'm constantly teaching a lot of different communication partners, but I think that it's not super intuitive to understand the importance of core language.
You know it. And typically, you know, when you and I do presentations, we don't really go deep into core vocabulary anymore because a lot of times we're talking to speech language pathologists or, you know, teachers that have been in the classroom for a little while. Maybe you've heard about core vocabulary. You know, we do definitely talk about it depending on the audience that we're talking to. But in this case, pre-service OTs, I felt like you needed to hit it pretty hard, right? And sure enough, one of the things that one of the sort of activities or experiences that I invited them to participate in is like, tell me some nouns that you have that you've come across in your service already, you know, and they're, you know, specific to OT. And they're like, well, like a reacher, you know, okay, now how would you describe reacher using core vocabulary? And it, you know, for them, they eventually got there, but it was work at first, like a tool that I use with my hands. I'm like, well, okay, use, that's good. I like that, you know? And so we got there, but because they hadn't really heard of core vocabulary before, it was so new to them, it took them a little bit of a lift to start thinking in core vocabulary. But you're spot on again. You jumped right into my brain. That was like a big section of the time was talking about core vocabulary.
And of course you talked about modeling.
You know, I did. That's how I sort of ended it. Well, almost sort of ended it. You could probably know where I ended it, but that was sort of the last half hour was talking about how we have to touch the device more than the student. And as an occupational therapist, your speech therapy best buddy is going to be needing you to be supporting them in doing that, because if it's an all-in approach. So if the OT's not there modeling along with the speech therapist and teacher and parent and everybody else, then those are minutes that are being left behind. So just know you have to touch the device more than the kids. That's likely why the kid, or actually adults, they could go work in an adult setting, but still you need to be modeling what you're trying to teach.
One other thing I thought of, Chris, that I think would be interesting is whenever I'm like doing a training with a group of people, I always like to think like, what's my desired outcome here? And of course it's like, yes, we want to empower and educate and inspire and do all these things, but wouldn't it be amazing if this group of OTs that you worked with then became the advocates for some of these students that they're working with? And so like thinking through the lens of like, what would I need to do to empower this group of people to sit at an IEP meeting and advocate on behalf of our students for AAC? Because I feel like that is like the next level of training, right? It's like when you're thinking through that lens and really trying to get the outcome, which is, again, having an OT sit in an IEP meeting where maybe they have a little bit more education or training around AAC than the SLP even. So what I'm thinking through is like, how would I facilitate that? And I feel like I would open up a really rich discussion around the types of, like, if one of my favorite coaching questions, you know this, Chris, is if your child or your student could say anything, like, what would they say in this situation? And like thinking through the lens of like your OT sessions, like what would your students be telling you? And what would you want them to be telling you? It's like, I'm thinking through the lens of sensory because a lot of our OTs are thinking through that lens too, and helping our students not only like learn their sensory systems and regulate, but also learning how to advocate for their sensory needs. And so I feel like what an amazing discussion to get them talking about what specific language, phrases, vocabulary would be helpful, and thinking through the lens of how to advocate for that in the IEP process, when you're collaborating alongside of the teacher, paraprofessionals, SLP. I feel like that would be a big goal of mine.
Yeah, you again are right inside my brain because we are so aligned in our thinking. I left them with the phrase, "You are now AAC activists." How will you help build language in your sessions? In how do you help promote languages using AAC to build language as a culture in whatever environment you're in, so it becomes sort of the way we do it, you know? And so I feel like that's not exactly what you were saying, but it's pretty adjacent to what you were saying.
Totally. This sounds like an amazing experience. Like, is there anything else that you left with? I'm like, if I know Chris Bouguet, maybe it's some tools, maybe it's some generative AI. Like, I don't know. So maybe it's robots.
Good. Those are good guesses. But you only have 4 hours, right? 4 hours AAC. I left that kind of stuff out with a little bit of a caveat that, foreshadowing that there's going to be a section later where we're talking about ed tech. So I know that I could tie that stuff back into now. How would you, knowing what you know now about language and using AAC to help with language and communication, then when we're talking about these other tools like text to speech and speech to text and robots and generative AI, how do those things align? So in these 4 hours I didn't talk about those tools. The two other things that I sort of mentioned were the pictures, and to not put as much onus on the pictures as you think you might. We did, of course, the Pictionary experience, and worked like a charm, where I asked somebody, we do this in our presentations. I asked somebody to leave the room. Everyone else draws a picture of one word. That person comes back in and they can't guess it because it's a core word. And it took this person, everyone hold up their picture on the screen, and eventually they get it. But it's such a powerful thing because when we take that moment to think through, like, how are our kids or how are the people who cannot read and experiencing the pictures don't mean as much as we think they do. And so, I left them thinking about the pictures and realizing, cover up the text. Think of it as if somebody is not seeing the text. What would you do to help teach them what this picture means? And then, of course, the last thing was, the 3-letter word, the big 3-letter F word,
Fun. That took way too long. I was like, oh, wow. Like, he's throwing a puzzle my way.
It's like a Wordle. And you got it on the first try. Yeah. Of course, I left with, it's got to be fun. Your therapy's got to be fun or you'll get burned out and the people won't enjoy it. And if kids are communicating in ways where they're not using language, or people are communicating in ways where they're not using language, they're using their bodies in some way to communicate, and that way is not as precise as you'd like, or is in some way that is where they're feeling threatened, or they're eloping, or they're pushing things away, or whatever. Recognize that maybe the experience is what needs to change. Maybe there's some sensory regulation things that you should be talking about and thinking about and helping with, but really, what is the experience they're in? What does that look like every single day? Is it boring nonsense that is just rote routine based in compliance, or is it fun and different and irreverent? And today my occupational therapist came in and wearing this silly hat, and why are you wearing this silly hat, or whatever? And that's how we left it, is like, after these 4 hours of learning, this deep dive into AAC, deep dive, how deep can you get in 4 hours? But yeah, 2 steps into the pool, not even really getting to the shallow end. But leaving at the fact that it's got to be fun, right?
I love it, Chris. Yeah. It sounds like an amazing experience. And like, we do trainings and sometimes it's like we'll have an OT or 2, but to have an entire group, I feel like, is really amazing.
Yeah, it felt like a really good opportunity to, help in a pre-service way, just like we did with Danielle Reed and Midwestern University. So without further ado, let's listen to our live Q&A with the students of Midwestern University. If you enjoy Talking with Tech, we could use your help in spreading the word about the podcast. Please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes. The more positive reviews the podcast gets, the easier it becomes for others to find it. The more people who find the podcast, the more the word spreads about how to effectively consider and implement AAC. And who doesn't want that? If that sounds good to you, please take a moment and give the podcast a quick review. We'd so very much appreciate it. Now, let's get back into the episode.
Hey guys.
All right, this is my class. You actually can't see all of them. Here's all of them.
Wow. Hi.
Hi, everyone.
This is Chris and Rachel. You guys have listened to their podcast.
We love that.
They listened this quarter to some of the user podcasts.
Good. Those are good ones.
Yeah, so we're just going to do a little question and answer. This is your time to ask those burning questions you still have about pediatric AAC, about AAC users. Chris and Rachel have a plethora of experience in this area, so I just like to, last year was really nice to just kind of chat with them, any questions you still have and hear their perspective about working with parents, about working with students. Chris works in a school district, so you can kind of get that perspective. And Rachel's working in private practice. She's currently in Hawaii right now, really early in the morning. So she's good for 6 a.m. That's not me at 6 a.m. And then Chris is in Pennsylvania. Nope. Tell me again.
Starts with a V.
Starts with a V. There's not very many. Virginia.
That's it. Danielle, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Chris.
Okay, sweet.
Okay, cool. So let's just open up. Who has a question that you want to ask these guys? You can do it. It can be anything. We can start with favorite color, favorite coffee drink.
Oat milk cappuccino, extra hot.
Every day. Well, I'll start. What is something you think these guys are going out to this is a little different than the last time you talked with them because we were in summer, but these guys in like 2-3 weeks are going to start their placements, their first practicum placements in healthcare or in schools. So what would you say if they end up with an AAC client in that placement that you would recommend that they kind of keep in mind or do, or what's kind of important for them to do in their AACs?
It's a good question.
Thanks.
My first thought is congratulations. You have someone who uses AAC. That's awesome. You will absolutely run into people no matter where you are, no matter what your service setting is going to be, who are using AAC. It is on the rise. In my school district, we put out 150 new AAC devices just last year, and we anticipate more this upcoming school year. So think about that as those kids grow older and grow older. So even if you go to a different setting, you're going to see AAC.
I would say you might feel overwhelmed because there's a lot of different AAC systems out there. And so you'll see one person with one AAC system and then the next person will be different. And just know that, you can figure out any information that's specific to any AAC system with a quick Google search. Like, how do I add a button on Touch Chat? Like, it's really not hard to figure out the systems. Just stay grounded in the fact that you understand language, you understand how to work with an individual, whether that's pediatrics or adults, and the systems and all of the technical details that can feel overwhelming because there's a lot out there. You don't have to be an expert at that. You have to be an expert at supporting communication through AAC. And I know because you've been working with Danielle and learning from her that you are very well equipped for that.
That was nice of you to say. I'll buy you coffee next time we're in Hawaii. All right. What else? What do you guys want to know? This is where we just wait.
This is where we really practice pause and wait time.
Pause and wait time. All right, Katie has a question.
What do you find to be the most difficult part of taking AAC?
The most difficult part of teaching kids to use AAC.
I got that. I go first.
Okay. I know a good answer, so go ahead, Chris.
Oh, no, go ahead. You have one? You go first.
I was going to say it's the most difficult part is actually everyone around the child, getting everyone around the child to do what they need to do. It's not the child, usually. It's like, how do we support communication partners? How do we help them learn all the skills that they need in order to support AAC users? And that for sure is a big challenge, getting people to buy in. Some people aren't bought into AAC and they're like, why do we need this? He can talk. And so I think that for sure is probably the biggest challenge that I face, at least in my clinical work.
Yeah, my answer is exactly adjacent to that it's the people around the learner and their mindset. Oh, well, they'll never learn how to do this. Or look at that. There's so many buttons. That's complicated. And I can't figure it out. How's that kid going to figure it out? All that nonsense is not true. It's on us to figure it out. It's on us to support the learners. So it's such an easy excuse to say, like, oh, it's too complicated. It's too hard. We have to lead with believing that someday every kid, everybody is going to learn language using AAC to be able to say whatever they want to say, however they want to say it. It's on us to figure out how they're going to do that, not say, oh, they're too anything to be able to learn AAC.
Yeah, Heather.
I was curious, is like, has two different speech therapists, and one recommends LAMP and the other recommends touch chat, and they each have their own different reasons for motor planning or organization. How can that be resolved?
Do you guys hear okay, or do you want me to repeat?
What was the last part of that? How do you
resolve that, or how do you decide?
resolve? Okay. With multiple perspectives on what AAC system to choose.
Yeah, which different types of outlines or approaches, motor planning versus folder based or those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the most important things when you're thinking about selecting an AAC system is making sure that we all make that decision together as a team and getting as many people on board with that meeting, those discussions. Of course, you might be in disagreement with someone. And that's going to come up across the board in lots of different situations. But figuring out all of the specific features that a student would benefit from using the SET framework by Joy Zabala is a really good launching off point to make sure we can all get on the same page and we can prioritize working together collaboratively. But in my own clinical work, I've definitely had situations where there's been some disagreements, mostly with this team member thinks that we should be using PECs, and I think we should be using, robust high-tech AAC. The actual systems themselves are mostly created equal in the sense that they are robust vocabulary systems. Many of the options on the market now are robust in nature, and so I don't get as hung up in the specific systems, assuming that they're robust. There are different features for every system that you will learn over time. And so I think that I don't know if that fully answers the question, but the biggest thing is that making sure it's robust. It has a keyboard, it has grammar, it has core words, it has all of these things that we know individuals need in order to fully support communication. If it's robust, it's not going to be a hill that I die on necessarily, because I need to collaborate. If the whole team is involved in the decision of what we're choosing for this student, then the whole team is usually more bought in to the actual implementation of that system. And conversely, if the team is divided in the initial stages of selection, then the team will continue to be divided as you roll out implementation. And so having those upfront conversations and really coming to an agreement as a team becomes really important.
I have a couple things to add. All of that. A quick resource for you is the very most recent Talking with Tech episode. Someone asked that exact question, or I was helping someone in a school district in Southern Alabama where they were trying to wrestle with similar questions. And so what Rachel just said, I said in the podcast in a recorded version that you could use as a resource to share with the two different speech therapists or the team to be like, what if we approached it this way? So in that, I'll give you the quick Cliff Notes version. In our school district, the way we do that is we have a table, and then we start in the first column with what are all the features we want, right? Like Rachel just said, core vocabulary, fringe vocabulary. Can we do phrases? How hard is it to get to the grammar in a different system? So easy access to grammar. How many hits does it take? So minimal number of hits might be something that is in this first column. What languages does the kid speak at home or exposed to at home? So that would be a piece of criteria. Something a lot of people might leave out, though, is, and I would invite that you consider, is what are the people? We just said that the biggest barrier is the people surrounding the communication partner. So what are the people that are surrounding the communication partner most familiar with? That shouldn't necessarily be the only factor, but it should be in the mix, because you're going to have to do so much more work if no one's ever seen AAC app X I don't know what AAC App X is, but I know what this one is. All right, well, if it's AAC App X is the best choice, I should say the least restrictive choice, then you got to learn it. But if everything else is equal, then maybe we'd pick the one that people know how to support because they'll be able to support it much better. And then the last thing is that I would add to that, answer that question is, you got this table, you filled it out, all the needs, and you've got LAMP in column 1 and touch chat in column 2 and Proloquo in column 3 and yada, yada, yada in 4 and 5. And you're filling out the chart and everything looks the same. It's all, any one of these would be good. The next question to ask, I think the big question to ask is, which of these tools do we think is least restrictive to the student now and in the future? What's the short-term least restrictive and what's the long-term least restrictive? That's a question that will sort of rejigger the conversation because no one ever asks that. It's always, what do you think is best? Well, I think it's this, and I think it's this, and now we're fighting. But when you can get people out of that mindset and go, well, together, what do we think is going to restrict the student least? I hadn't thought of that question before. People pause and recenter, I think, when you invite them to think about that particular question.
It could be about users or therapy individuals. Yeah.
What's one of the most rewarding experiences you've had while working?
Most rewarding experiences when working with AAC.
Ooh, that's such a good one. I don't know. There's so many. I mean, what the most rewarding experiences? I think when you do this work, you oftentimes come across families that have been to numerous speech therapists and they feel somewhat at the end of their rope or in a situation where they feel hopeless because they've been on this journey for a while and they're trying to get traction. They're trying to find the right, supports for their child. And so we have this really incredible gift to give communication to individuals that are really struggling. And I feel like if you can be the beacon of hope, if you can be the person that's has unwavering faith and belief that change is possible, it doesn't matter what's happened and what's been tried before me, I've got you, we will figure this out together. If you can really gain that momentum and really be, that shining light for a family, it's really incredible. And I feel like I'm not thinking of one specific situation, but one of the things that I love about this work with this population is that we have the ability to do that. And when you can share that and that sense of optimism, if I'm on a call with a new client, a discovery call, talking to that family, I've had parents in tears, just so excited to meet me because I have, shared we've got this, come in, see me. I'm so excited to meet your child. We will figure this out. And if you come with that attitude, it's really powerful and you can see amazing things happen. And so I think that probably is my answer. It's just, we have this ability, if we choose to be the person that believes change is possible and that we can figure it out together.
I'm going to take a similar tack there. Rachel, do you remember you and I were presenting together in Arizona and a mom stood up? She's probably going to be listening to this podcast episode. And she started crying, saying, you guys changed my life. My kid would not have had the resources. I wouldn't have known what to do or how to approach the school district or other people if I wasn't listening to the podcast. And so, afterwards, you and I are slapping high fives like that. That was really a powerful moment. Right. So yes, that everything Rachel said. And then because I work in a school district, I have an opportunity to see kids interacting with other kids. And that's awesome because you're having these peer moments that might not have existed without AAC. And then, I don't know if you can see, but I got some gray in this beard. I've been around for a while. I have this fear. You sitting there, the next generation, right, Danielle? We got these young, exciting, that 3 years from now, some of you are going to be going, well, what did I do? Why did I get into this, right? But when you stick it out, when you provide this longer term experience, you have an opportunity to really shift entire cultures around a school district, right? You could be, I know it's happened where I've worked, where there was virtually no AAC. It was all PECs. And now 150 AAC devices this past school year, right? We have entire schools that are doing trainings with all of the staff on how to model on a core board, and then general ed first grade and second grade teachers coming to trainings going, well, I got 2 kids in my class. How do I support them, right? So the culture is shifting, and over time you can make that happen. You can really influence a widespread number of people, because now when you graduate I'm going to say right now, from graduating from this conversation, you are an AAC activist, right? And so you can have this widespread change with the family, with a particular student, or an entire population of people.
True. Yeah. I know there was another hand I didn't call. Yeah.
What is one tip you would give us as like new SLPs who have never been exposed to AAC devices?
One tip.
I got 2.
Even better.
The first one is listen to the podcast. I know that's self-serving, but the point is that we've got 7 years of content. It's ongoing professional learning. We don't have any plans on stopping anytime soon, right? You don't, right, Rachel? You're not stopping.
Correct, Chris. We're going to keep going.
So that has been something we have heard over the years, is that we've learned so much, because really in the spec, there's more ways to learn about AAC than ever, but there's still not a lot of ways to learn about AAC, and sometimes it costs money, and there's not a lot of time, but chances are you're going to be commuting. So, listening once a week to a podcast, or even once a month, picking on it, just dipping in your toe, would be a way to in kind of keep your feet wet and kind of know what to be doing. That's one. I guess I got 3, Rachel. Sorry. Second one is social media. Follow the people. Follow Rachel, right? Follow the people that you trust in AAC land. And then the third is start practicing. You know what I'm going to say, Rachel? Start practicing with generative AI. Generative AI is here. It's going to stay. The more minutes you can start practicing and using that for your own productivity, you're going to start to see connections. So suddenly you're presented with a case, and you're like, well, generative AI can help us choose the AAC. It can help me learn more about the specific syndrome or disability. It can give me strategies on how to approach a conflict that I'm having. So I can learn about different strategies to help in a particular intervention. So there's all sorts of different ways to start using that to shrink the amount of time and keep your knowledge base up.
I love that. All of what Chris said. Be thirsty for learning, and know that any information that you don't know, you can find out. Because I feel like it can feel overwhelming when you're a new clinician. It can also feel overwhelming when you have lots of experience. I don't know everything, and I'm not afraid to say when I don't know something, but I know that I have the ability to find it out or figure it out. I'm not afraid to ask for help from other professionals. One of the best things is that I now have connections with lots of other people in the field of AAC users. But don't be afraid to just reach out, send someone an email. I mean, I get emails all the time from people, and people are shocked when I respond to them. But don't be afraid to seek out the information that you don't know, and be really honest with whoever you're with about, like, I literally was in an assessment last week, and it was a tool that I'm not as familiar with. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I was like, but I'll find out, and I'll circle back, and I'll send you an email. It's okay to not know. It's not okay to not know and not try. And so I think that it's really important when you're thinking about a field that feels so vast, and, many of you will go out and you might not necessarily become an AAC specialist, but you will encounter AAC. And so don't be afraid to ask that for support, and don't be afraid to ask the questions that you're not sure about. There's still situations where I'm like, I'm not sure, because this is a very complex student. And the more kind of brains I can get on this case, the better able we are to come together and figure out solutions. And so being collaborative, asking questions, those are all things that I think could be really, really helpful in this field.
I got one more.
Yeah.
My very first speech language pathology class back at the State University of New York in Fredonia, Dr. John Onyefrak was his name, and he gave me the best advice I've ever gotten, ever. It sticks in the front of my brain, and I think about it in every interaction I'm in, and that is simply this. He said, the speech language pathologist should be the most fun person in the building. And because people talk about languages generated by novel experiences, weird stuff. People talk about what's fun and what's interesting, not the mundane, boring. If you find that it's boring for you and it's boring for the kid or for your client or whatever, change. Figure out how you, use generative AI. How can I make this fun? Because if you're not sure, but it's okay. Today we're recording this on the day after Halloween. It's okay to dress in the wacky costume, right? You should, on any day, right? It's okay to make it. It's okay. It's preferred. It should be so fun that kids are looking forward to it. Parents are looking forward to interacting with you. It's school. Just that setting shouldn't be drudgery. I can't imagine an adult setting should be drudgery either. It should be this fun, enjoyable experience.
Yeah, if you're bored, they're bored, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, Michaela.
I was just curious how you both got into the AAC life, I guess.
How'd you get trapped?
Come to love it and want to do it, or do the podcast for 7 years?
It's a great question. I'll go first.
Can you repeat it? I'm not sure I got all of it.
Yeah, how'd you get into the work, and how'd you get stuck doing a podcast for 7 years?
How did I meet this guy? So I was always the person that was interested in the challenging cases. I was always like, okay, how do I help? How do I do this? I remember my first really challenging case was a student, and he had a lot of aggression and a lot of frustration because he was non-speaking. And I just remember feeling very overwhelmed. I was a CFY. I had just started my career, and I realized very immediately I needed some type of AAC because he wasn't, imitating. He wasn't really imitating any signs or any verbal approximations. And so that was kind of my introduction. I worked with the AAC specialist who came in and worked alongside of me to do an assessment. And I was hooked after that. I was like, wow, to see this student transform and to start being able to communicate. We see all of the frustration and the aggression and all these things decrease once he had communication. And then my personality tends to be pretty intense. So when I'm interested in something, I just go down rabbit holes. I'm just okay, how can I find more and more information? I read every article. I was trying to do as much professional development. And eventually I got to a place where I was introduced to Chris and also Lucas Stuber. He's the one actually who brought us all together. We originally were 3 SLPs on the Talking with Tech podcast. I got asked to do a podcast, and I was like, I didn't even know what a podcast was. And I was like, I don't feel qualified to be a host of an AAC podcast. But instead of saying, no, I'm not ready or I'm not qualified, I was like, I can figure this out. I'll figure out what I don't know. I leaned in. I decided to say yes, which I would say is such an important thing when you have that moment of I don't feel ready or I don't feel qualified or any of those limiting beliefs. Just lean forward. And that's what I ended up doing. And here we are 7 years later into the podcast. And what's been so cool is that this podcast is continuous professional development for me. Every week I talk to Chris, I learn something new. We have amazing guests on. And so I didn't feel like an AAC expert when I started this podcast, but over time I learned so much, and I still feel like I'm learning. Every week I still feel like there's something new that I can learn. And so that's been my journey with AAC and how I've stepped into this specific population and specific expertise.
I'm going to try and keep this as short as possible, but it's a long story. So I'm going to give the first part is I took a year off after high school and went to Finland as an exchange student. I had no interest in speech language. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I go to Finland and I start noticing I don't need to learn Finnish, right? How often am I going to speak Finnish? But the people in Finland really need to speak English. So I spoke a lot of English to them and they spoke a lot of English to me. And I started noticing patterns of errors. They kept saying, like, whenever they'd go, I think about that. Let me think about that. And then they go, hey, I want that think over there. And why are they messing up thing and think? Like, they're all making that mistake. Why are they messing that up? Well, K and G, similar spot, right? And I didn't know it at the time. I learned it later in speech. But I was like, oh, K's and G's is the same thing. One's voiced, one's not. But more than that, language-wise, anything you can think is a think. Anything you could think is a thing, right? Those conceptually, those things over. So that just got me really curious. And that took me into speech. Fast forward 3 years into my career, I was never afraid of AAC. We had Big Macs and Tech Talks, these devices that don't worry about them. Old school devices. And I was never afraid of them. So I kind of got a reputation of having like, oh, Chris, not afraid of tech. I would never have thought of myself as a technology person either. Just like I wasn't afraid of it. And 3 years into the career as a speech therapist, they asked me to be one of the founding members of our assistive technology team. I go out and I do my first assistive technology evaluation. I'll never forget it. It was a first grade classroom, self-contained, which means all the students have disabilities. It was a particular girl who doesn't speak. Rachel, do you know this? Do you know this story? I don't even know if you know.
I'm learning something.
Okay, so this girl's non-speaking. I would have said nonverbal at the time, but over the years I've learned now I would say non-speaking. Everyone leaves that evaluation. Me, the speech therapist at the building. At the time, we were just starting our team. So 2 of us went out to do evaluations together to kind of learn together. The teacher, right? We didn't ask the parents. Now I would learn. Of course, I'm always going to involve the parents, but this is 2003-ish, right? So we leave, and you know what we suggested? I think what we suggested, about 95% of the speech therapists or educators would have suggested the exact same thing. You got to guess, Rachel? Can you guess what we suggested back in 2003 for someone who was completely non-speaking?
Like a go talk? I don't know.
Pretty close. It was something called an I talk with 2 buttons. Can you guess what was on each of those buttons?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. And I left going, oh yeah, I have set her on the path, right? She'll go from 2 buttons to 4 buttons and 4 to 6 and 6 to 8. And 10 years goes by of me working in schools, helping teachers, and we did a lot of good work. And I know we helped a lot of people. That said, 10 years later, I'm sitting in my car, and it's now 2013-ish, and it's the beginning of the school year, and I have a box of equipment in the trunk of my car, and I have a spreadsheet that is printed out, and I go, oh, I'm supposed to deliver the equipment in the trunk to the high school, the high school parking lot. I'm going to go into the high school. So I pull up my spreadsheet and I see on that list, oh my gosh, this is the first girl that I ever did an AT evaluation on. I wonder how she's doing, because you lose track over time and other people were supporting her. And so I wonder how she's doing. I wonder what piece of equipment I'm going to go drop off for this girl. What do you all think it was?
I have no idea.
Same exact device. 10 years, this girl was practicing yes, no on the same device, somehow making some sort of progress on our IEP. Probably her goal was at, whatever the goal was to say yes or no was probably a 50%, 51%, 52%. What? So I had a little moment there in the car where I kind of broke down, like, You don't get in, you all know this, you should know this. You don't get into this job for, the giant bucks. You know what I mean? You get in it to help people. And I was like, I didn't help this girl. I kept her locked into yes, no, because I was the one that helped make that decision. I was the principal person they called out to help. And so I realized I was doing things wrong. And that made me, like Rachel said, always be curious. Made me 95% of the people back in 2003 would have also said yes, no. What would the other 5% have done? And I started doing research and finding out, okay. And that led me to evidence-based practice. I created a little rubric in my head. So when I started learning about things, I'd be like, that's sus. That's why, it's not checking off my boxes. And that is, what does the science say? What's the research behind it? What is what other professionals say? And then the third thing, which I think is the most important thing, which brings us to the podcast, which is what do adult AAC users, if we believe that people can learn to say whatever they want to say, however they want to say it using AAC, then who has done that? Who are AAC users that are doing that? Let me go learn from them, and they'll tell me what to do and what not to do. Like, stop this. They would have told me, don't give me a yes, no button. How am I going to learn language that way, right? So I think that would be my answer, is that I had some really tough moments, and like, not one more kid are we going to do. And I don't always win that battle, but now there's a whole shift in the culture around how we think about AAC, so that there are still kids that we need to work on, but less than before, and more than ever are getting those robust language that Rachel was talking about.
I'm gonna kick this off in like 3, but we can pop back on if we need to. Same room. Yeah, Hillary.
I was curious if you guys had any experiences or advice if maybe there's some controversial words you wanted to add to someone, like a teenager's AAC, and then you get some kickback from the parents. Like, you're a 15-year-old boy, and you're like, I feel like we should add like curse words. And then mom's like, oh, little Johnny doesn't need that. What are you talking about? Like, how can you like have that conversation and kind of explain it that they can, appropriate?
Like age appropriate vocabulary.
Got it. How would I mean, I always like to think about everything I do when I feel stuck in a situation like this. What would I do with a student who had verbal speech? Because I think it's a really good way to level the playing field. And we wouldn't have any ability to stop a 14-year-old from swearing that had verbal speech. And so generally speaking, my thought is, well, why would we stop an AAC user who's 14 from communicating whatever they want to say? So I would have that conversation with the family and share my thoughts, my experience. I think when you talk about, well, what will we do if, your child had verbal speech and could learn whatever word that they heard and wanted to say? I think that can help reframe. Ultimately, I would defer to whatever the parent had decided on. My opinion is that I'm there to support families, and it's not ultimately my decision. And so I would do my best to explain my thoughts and feelings around giving access to all the words, and ultimately would let the family decide what they felt most comfortable with, because ultimately that student is not 18, is not an adult. And so that would be my answer.
100% agree with everything Rachel said. And just to expand that, I wanted to pull the camera back a little bit. That is a very specific case where someone is thinking about restriction. And that is only one time. That there are going to be other times in your career where people are going to ask you to restrict things. A great example for me is, hey, this kid keeps clicking on the mouse. Can we do something when they can't click on the mouse? It's like, well, just like Rachel said, what would you do for somebody else who could click on the mouse? Or if someone was picking their nose, would you put things in front of their nose so they can't pick their nose, or would you teach them not to pick their nose, right? So just in the back of your mind, or as a platitude to remember, we educate over restrict. Yes, there are times where you need safety things, like we're going to put little baby caps over the electrical sockets, right? But then we're also going to teach you through videos and songs and play and role play and all different ways why you shouldn't stick a fork in the electrical socket. Same thing here. Yeah, okay, parents, we hear you. What if we put them on there and then we taught them not to use it, or use it selectively, right? Or when to use it, because we're really awesome at educating kids and really bad at restricting kids. So let's lean into what we do really, really well, which is teach kids.
Yeah. Do you guys have any rookie mistakes that you could share that would be beneficial for us to learn?
Any rookie mistakes that it would be beneficial for them to learn from? Don't set up somebody with a yes, no.
Correct.
What else?
Rookie mistakes. That's a good one. I'm thinking about myself as a rookie.
Mine would just be limiting the vocabulary. Like, don't limit the vocabulary. That's the biggest one I made, was thinking that we had to start with PECs because everybody said we had to start with PECs.
Yeah.
Or starting with a little device and moving them to bigger devices because that's what everybody else is doing.
Right. Starting
with something simple doesn't mean, like you said, Chris, is going to get to a robust system eventually. Those were the biggest mistakes I made with early.
Yeah. That's Danielle, just to expand on that for a second. When Rachel and I do longer presentations, one of the things we bring up is masking. And so a concept is what's least restrictive, right? Is to not mask, have a kid prove to you that they can't use the whole system, and then know that you don't have to live in one or the other, meaning you could, for these 15 minutes, we're going to mask, and then leave it open most of the time, right? What I mean mask is you have the whole system, but you're just hiding certain buttons so the buttons don't move around. That's another one. Don't move the buttons around. Another one might be not doing anything around literacy. These kids won't learn how to read. No, let's start right away. A rule of thumb could be model the core and spell the fringe. So if you're reading a book with a kid, for instance, every time you get to a core word, you could model that core word on the device so they learn where it is. But then when you get to chrysanthemum, I don't know, do they need that programmed into the device, or can we start to spell it? That sounds like a K. Is it a K? No, but look here in the book, it's CH. Let's go CH. Having those conversations around the keyboard, I think I wish I had done that earlier. Involving parents in the decision. I wish I had done that earlier.
Yeah, to that point, actually, being collaborative, prioritizing that, because it does take extra effort and time. But the payout, when you choose to take that extra half an hour to talk to the family on the phone, or reach out to the OT or the other SLP on the case, like those moments are so powerful, and it takes a little bit of extra time and effort. And it's easy to be like, no, I don't have time for that. Or like, no, it's not, I'm not going to do it. And so I wish I would have earlier on understood the value of taking the extra time to make the connection and collaborate.
Yeah. So if we have a kid and we realize that their parents aren't really using the device at home and there's potentially some neglect at home, do you have any like key points or tips for navigating the conversations with like the parents to really encourage and inspire them to use it?
Yeah, I'll go first with this one, Rachel, and I'll keep it short. That first conversation about having this conversation with a table and the private speech therapist and the public speech therapist not sure what device, are arguing with. So that whole scenario, if the parents are there when we're making the decision in the first place, now we all have ownership. So at the end of that meeting, it's like, all right, we're going to start using this at home too, right? Because you were there when we made the decision. Where someone else comes in, this outside person, and makes the decision, parents don't have any buy-in, so that's a place to start. And when you're choosing, make sure the parents are right there from the beginning. I have more to say, but I'm going to turn it over to you, Rachel.
One thing I'll add, which I feel like is also a rookie mistake, is putting the onus on the child or even the communication partners. It's really easy to be upset with a parent because they're not modeling at home or they're not using the device. And it's really easy to say, that's why he's not making progress, because they're not using it at home. And that could be true. It could be true that they're not using it at home. And if they used it at home, the child would make more progress. We know that, right? But if we think through the lens of compassion and curiosity, we can approach a family with empathy and really asking questions about why they're not using it, leading with questions. And again, compassion and curiosity really helps us understand family dynamics. We have to really understand as clinicians that parents of children with disabilities have so much on their plate. Sometimes these kids are in and out of hospitals. They have medical things going on. They have lots of other providers asking them to do things at home. And so sometimes communication and language is not a top priority. It's like, I just want my child to be out of the hospital right now, or I need to figure out how to get them to sleep. And so I feel like when you start understanding how much a parent has on their plate, you can again approach what you're asking of them with more compassion. And also, parents are overwhelmed with lots of things and they don't know how to do what we're asking of them. And so if we can take the time to talk with a family, ask the right questions, figure out one motivating routine with one word or phrase that they can start integrating and modeling, starting small and getting a small win with a family at home can then expand. But if you have a family that's so overwhelmed that they just put their hands up and say, I can't do it, it's too much. It's our job. It's our job to figure out how to make it sustainable. I do a lot of work with parent coaching in my practice. And when families come to me and say, I haven't modeled this week, like, I'm really sorry, or I didn't do the thing, I didn't take a video, like they feel so guilty that they haven't shown up and done something. And I always put that on me. Okay, well, let me figure out how to make that achievable for you. It's my job to figure out how we can, talk and collaborate so that you can feel like what I'm asking of you works within your family unit, within your current schedule. And so it's really on us to have those conversations to make something feel achievable for a communication partner at home. And also, again, just being really cognizant that we don't know the full picture of what's going on. And so really being compassionate with families.
Yeah, I'll add just two things to that. And that is everything Rachel said. And oftentimes we think an hour of training. I told you you have to model on this device. How come you're not modeling on the device? It's more complex than that. It's sort of like showing someone a YouTube video and going on how to ride a bike and go, oh, kid, how come you can't ride a bike? I just showed you a video on how to do it, right? Or how come you can't throw a football? I just showed you a video on how to throw a football. It's much more complicated. It's a skill to start to integrate it in. So, like Rachel said, these small little wins, small little goals for them to get better. But oftentimes in the school, we're not even really coaching parents. We're just telling them, do this thing, and then they can't do the thing. So Rachel used the word coach. A rookie mistake is I just graduated from my graduate program. I know all this stuff about speech language pathology. So teacher, parent, anyone who's asking, I can recite all sorts of stuff to you. I'm really, really good. You're going to all be really, really good at telling people what to do. You should model on that device. I learned it. I heard Chris and Rachel and Danielle, and maybe we got to practice a little bit in our setting. So I know you have to model on that device. Lead with asking more questions than telling people what to do. So, and that's another skill, but just be like, okay, hey, I know you want to model more. What's getting in your way? How can I help you model more? What do you think we could do in the environment? What could we change in the environment to make that happen? Those are just 3 questions off the top of my head, and there's a billion more. But anytime you want to start interjecting, tell you what to do, here's what you should do. You should get in the front seat and bring that AAC device, and you should say go before you drive off the... Yes, it's a good piece of advice. Chances that they do it are really low. But if you start asking questions about, okay, when you go shopping, right, they're going to be together. How do you think you could bring that device with you? When do you think you could use it? They'll own the answers. So lead with more questions than statements.
I'll add one more thing that's so good, Chris. One of my favorite questions to ask a parent is, what's your favorite time of day with your child? Because if I ask that question, it's like, oh, like right before bed, we snuggle and read books, or we always watch a show, or our family does XYZ. I say favorite moment because we really want to integrate language opportunities with moments where a child and a parent are happy with each other. They're having a great moment. It's not like, well, before we leave for school and we're rushing around and like at breakfast time, let's get the device out, right? It helps figure out a really great moment to start integrating in that's motivating for both parties, the child and the parent. And so I love asking that question as a launching off point to figure out how we can start integrating modeling in AAC.
All right, let's do one more question. What do you think? I mean, if you're the only one with a question, let's ask it. What do you have? Yeah, Katie, go ahead.
What are some common barriers you come across in using high-tech AAC devices, besides the family caregiver buy-in to use it?
Our biggest barrier is high-tech, using high-tech that's not necessarily buy-in. Like, what's the other barriers to using high-tech over something else?
Barriers to using high tech. Other than buy-in.
Is that right?
While you're thinking of it, I have a sort of a fake answer, and that is a lot of people will think it's financial. Oh, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. No, it's the mindset, because once you know that you need it, now we can go off and rock and roll. Let's find out how we're going to afford it. Are we going to do donors choose? Are we going to do a car wash? Are we going to look for grants? Are we going to make low tech materials that relate to the high tech materials so that there's a transition there? We can plaster those everywhere. There's ways to get funding once you know you need the funding. But people will think that's a barrier. It's not really a barrier.
Especially now with the cost.
It is a barrier, but it's one that's mitigated. You can do something about.
And it's much more affordable now than it's ever been before. It's way more reachable. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that I have anything to add. I mean, other than mindset, which kind of goes into buy-in. It's like, oh, like that's too complex. That's too hard. That's too much. It's like all of these kind of myths, right? And they're all circled around limiting beliefs.
I got one. And this, back to Rachel's point of collaborating with other people, your best bestie is going to be occupational therapist, and your second best bestie is going to be your physical therapist. Those and other related service people that you can collaborate with, because a barrier to these devices is that they all weigh something, right? They're not lightweight. I guess an iPhone is lightweight, and there's an AAC on that, but an iPad is, for some kids, is going to be a little bit heavy, and they're going to have to build up strength. Or if someone's in a wheelchair, how do we get the thing to sit in a place where all those logistical things are barriers that you don't have to solve on your own. You have a team of people that you can collaborate on to figure out. Those are sometimes challenging, but also anything that's challenging is equally that much more rewarding, because you're going to figure it out.
Yeah, I feel like the kids that have motor challenges oftentimes are the ones where you're less likely to see robust AAC, because it takes a lot of collaboration and a lot of sometimes time to teach alternative access. It's an area where a lot of SLPs feel like, oh, I don't know what to do with eye tracking or, switch scanning or any type of alternative access. And so again, you can figure out the information that you don't know. You can reach out to people that can help you. Oftentimes the companies that have AAC systems have reps that you can talk to and have come out and show you what to do. So there's support out there for you. We just don't want to limit kids. And it's really important that no matter what a child's disability or physical abilities, they have access to the same robust language opportunities that everyone else has access to. It just can sometimes take a little bit more time and collaboration and problem solving to figure out how to help them access.
I have one last piece of advice before we go, and that is looking at my crystal ball. I know, Rachel, you're gonna agree with me with this. You're all gonna have moments in your practice, no matter what it is, where you're gonna feel imposter syndrome. You're gonna be like, oh, it's not me. There's someone else. Someone else would be better at this than me. There must be somebody that knows how to do. There might be one or two people that you can research, you can go out and reach out to and get advice from, but you're the person. You do have the skills. You have Danielle as your professor, right? You're well versed in what to do here. Just know that you're not alone. You're in a community of people, and you will figure it out.
Love that, Chris. Yes.
Awesome. Let's thank them so much for coming and for creating such an amazing podcast for you guys. Thank you guys so much. So great to see you, even though just on a video. Are you guys going to go to ASHA this year? I forget.
No, I'm not going to ASHA this year. It's like the first year I haven't gone in years.
Have some major
ATIA? ATIA, Danielle? Will you be at ATIA?
I need to figure out when that is, and hopefully I can get there.
January, end of January.
Okay.
Highly recommend. Everybody go to ATA. We'll be there.
Okay. Well, we'll take a class trip together. We'll see you guys there. We'll have a party.
I love it.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Have a great one. Have a good weekend.